He didn't point it out to me, but that's okay. Welcome to what is actually session 7 of our spring semester, and we will meet for the last time next week. Our 10-week Bible study became an 8-week Bible study, and that was due to the weather and me having to be gone 1 week. Some are wondering if we would be able to finish the Gospel of John next fall. If we get in 10 sessions next fall, I will find a way to make sure that we get through. Without having to rush, we'll just plan it so that we can get through the rest of the Gospel next fall. So we'll meet tonight and then next Wednesday, and you'll be gone. How many of you have been enjoying the nice spring weather that we've been having? Oh, yeah. It's lovely. Most of you know, many of you know, that I was raised in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and still have a brother who lives there and some high school friends that I regularly have contact with. And I knew what the weather was like, and so I just called my buddy and said, by the way, are the golf courses in Winnipeg open yet? Which I thought was funny, I thought it was funny. They're having a blizzard in Winnipeg. Well, you saw what's going on in the Northwest, and it's moved across, Montana, Wyoming, and into the Dakotas, and of course, it is affecting Winnipeg too. It is so bad in Winnipeg that they have closed school for 2 days. I went to 12 years of school there and missed 1 day due to bad weather. So when they're closing the schools for 2 days in a row, it suggests that not only is it snowing, but Jack said the winds are about 50 miles an hour, which makes for a pleasant day. In April, the middle of April, I said to Jack, well, there are alternatives to where you can live, but he didn't see any future in that. But I decided I would mention it. Okay, so most of the major events in Jesus' ministry, and especially his miracles, bring about a division of reaction among the people. There are some people who are favorably disposed to what Jesus said or did, but there is on the other side folks who just didn't think that was worth very much, or even worse, that it was an anti-God thing to say. I wanted to mention 2 of them. One of them was the healing of the lame man who had been at the pool and had nobody to put him in. And Jesus healed that man, and the reaction was divided. Some said, well, that's a wonderful thing for him to do. And others said, but wait, it was the Sabbath. He shouldn't be doing that kind of stuff on the Sabbath. And they were violently opposed to this man carrying his mat. And then the man who was born blind in John chapter 9. When he was healed, there was definitely mixed reaction. In chapter 9 and verse 16, I didn't put this in your notes, but you have a pencil. You can write it down if you want to. In chapter 9 and verse 16, it says, some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. But others asked, how can a sinner do such miraculous signs? So they were divided, is what the text says. And so, anytime Jesus does something amazing or says something that is puzzling, some like it, some don't, some are believers, some are unbelievers. So we've gotten used to that throughout the gospel. Now I want you to see that the reaction to the raising of Lazarus was divided again, but markedly so. In verses 45 and 46 of chapter 11 that we looked at last week, therefore many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did put their faith in him. Now what he did was to command a stone to be removed from the tomb, called out Lazarus' name, and here he came walking out in his grave clothes. That was the event. And a lot of people, John says, who saw that believed in Jesus because of the event. But verse 46 says, but some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Do you think they're believers? No. You don't tattletale on somebody you believe in. And they knew that the Pharisees had interest in what Jesus was doing, and they were more than happy to go tell them, well, he's up to it again. He called a guy out of the tomb. So they went and told the Pharisees what Jesus had done. And apparently, it's hard for us to remember. Well, it shouldn't be, because we've been on this a long time. It's hard for us to remember, though, that the Jewish leaders have been dealing with Jesus and the things that he's been saying and doing for months. And during those months, there had been a growing degree of frustration with Jesus. And with the idea of what are we going to do about this? How are we going to solve this problem? It doesn't seem to be going away. In fact, he seems to be gaining more and more followers. And so finally they said, we need to get a meeting of the entire Sanhedrin to come together and to find out what we are going to do. And I see an irony, almost a ridiculous irony, in verse 47 of chapter 11. It says, what are we accomplishing? That's the Sanhedrin saying this. What are we accomplishing? Here is this man performing many miraculous signs. Well, you'd think maybe they'd go, and because of that, we're going to be followers. But there is no hint of that. They don't deny what he's doing. They don't say, oh, he's just tricking people. They say he is performing many miraculous signs. And if we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. Not us, of course, but everybody else will believe in him. And then, you know what's going to happen? The Romans will come and take away both our place. Are you following me in the text? I have a little A beside the word place. And it says, or temple at the bottom. As if maybe that's what they're talking about. They'll take away our place or our temple and our nation. Now, because the Jews had such fervor for their religion, the Romans granted them more freedom to practice their religion than they did with a lot of peoples whose land they occupied. But they're not going to put up with civil unrest. If the followers of Jesus really get wrapped up in some kind of messianic fervor, and the Romans are going to quash this thing, and you know who's going to suffer as a result of that? We are. And I don't know that this is implied in the text, but when it says we will lose our place, I think what they're saying is not only will we lose the temple, but we'll lose our place.
Standing.
In other words, we've got it good. We run things. We call the shots. We're esteemed. Everybody looks up to us. Life couldn't be much better than this. But if we don't get rid of this Jesus guy, we're going to lose our standing, our way of living, our quality of life. We're going to lose all of that if we don't do something about Jesus. And so there's this talk that's going back and forth in the Sanhedrin, and finally Caiaphas, who John says was high priest that year, stood up and said, this is a paraphrase, "You're a bunch of dingbats. Y'all are just so stupid. Can't you figure it out?" Caiaphas says that it is more expedient for you if one man should die than for the whole nation to perish. And they went, whoa, he means business. Caiaphas is basically announcing that it's time to get rid of Jesus. And he doesn't pull any punches. That he should die rather than the whole nation should perish. Now, when the Romans took over, the high priest was a fellow named Annas. But his son-in-law, Caiaphas, was appointed priest. And every year, it came up for, I hate to say it, but bid. It came up for bid as to who was going to be the high priest. And the Romans always looked to see who was willing to pay the most. And whoever paid the most could continue to be high priest. And Caiaphas had a lot of money. And he continued year after year to pay the Romans. And he continued to be the high priest. And John wants to add a little bit to what Caiaphas said. I hope you read the text, right? I send out the notes and you say, oh, here's what I need to read, right? Okay, good. John says, when Caiaphas said, it is better for you that one man should die than that the whole nation should perish, there was a sense in which he was speaking for God. He didn't know it, but he was speaking for God. And ironically, the high priest, because of his position, was one who was supposed to speak for God. And John said, well, in this he did, but not in the way that he thought. He meant that it was better that Jesus should die so that the whole nation could be saved. And John says that spread out to the whole world. That's what John's determination was. That Caiaphas actually spoke for God. It was necessary to kill Jesus so that even the scattered children of God in verse 52 could be saved. And there's an ominous tone in verse 53. So from that day on, they planned to take his life. I mean, they wanted him dead. They had tried to stone him a couple of times. They had tried to arrest him a couple of times. He'd always eluded their grasp. But they said this time, he is not going to get away. Whatever we have to do, we will do so that this man will no longer mess up the plans that we have for ourselves and for our nation as well. So Jesus realized that the time was near. We've been pointing out how in the Gospel of John it is often said, my hour has not yet come, or my time has not yet come. But Jesus realizes when that time is, and right now it's about a week away. And John says he withdrew to a small town near the desert. It was Ephraim, maybe named for the tribe of Ephraim, I don't know, but a small town named Ephraim, and that's where he spent the time with his disciples. And I've wondered, if I knew that I had 1 week to live, what would I want to do? Well, you know, the surface answer is to say, well, I'd like to play Pebble Beach. You know? I can't tell you that's not involved in my thinking process, but the truth of the matter is, I would like to spend the time with people that I love and feel close to. I mean, I've got 2 sons and a stepson and daughter and grandchildren. I mean, I might even spend time with Paul, you know? I mean,
God help me.
yes, God would have to help you, Paul. But I would want to spend time with people who were important to me and with whom I had established relationships over time. And Jesus had spent quite a bit of time with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. We're going to see about them in a minute, but it was with the 12. He had walked the paths of Palestine with these guys for 3+ years. He now realizes his life has a very, very, very short wick at the end. And he takes the 12 to Ephraim and he begins to spend time. You know, I would just love to have sat in on some of those conversations and to hear the bonehead things the disciples said. You know they did. Sometimes we read the Bible and we think, oh, the apostles. No. They they struggle just like every single one of us would do in that situation. They hardly ever know what's going on, and no matter how much Jesus talks about what's going to happen to him, they have written it off. They say things like, God forbid, Lord, that'll never happen to you. Why would you refute the Son of God? Because you can't handle that. Anyway, so John introduces the Passover. And the Passover, of course, is the feast in which Jesus will surrender his life. And it's right around the corner, to the point where some pilgrims are already arriving in Jerusalem to purify themselves to be ready for the Passover. There are sacrifices to offer. There are washings, you know. Some probably need more purification than others. I won't mention. But if you're going to celebrate the Passover in the right way, you need to make sure that you are clean from whatever it is that keeps you from celebrating the Passover. So some of the pilgrims came early in order to take care of that. And John says that much of the conversation that was going on in Jerusalem was about Jesus. Things like, well, what do you think? Is he going to show? Oh, why would he? Everybody knows that they're out to get him. As a matter of fact, the Pharisees, the Sanhedrin, had made it known that if anybody saw him, or if anybody heard anything about where he was, they needed to let them know. And there would be a stiff penalty to pay if you did not let them know. So under those circumstances, you think he'll show up? Well, he probably shouldn't, but I know of other times when he shouldn't have showed up, and he did. So, they speculated, they talked, they wondered about whether or not he was going to come. Now, John rather casually mentions that Jesus made the decision to go back to Bethany. Now, you remember, Bethany is about 2 miles east of Jerusalem. It's close. Bethany is the place where Lazarus had been buried and Jesus had called him from the tomb. Bethany is the place where Mary and Martha and Lazarus all lived. John mentions, casually, he decided to go back to Bethany. But here's the crux of what I want us to know tonight and to be reminded of tonight. Most of you know this anyway. It was no casual decision that Jesus made. It wasn't a, you know what, let's just go to Bethany. They got a 9-hole course there, and I like to play there. Let's just go to Bethany. What do you think? No. It was a decision that he knew would ultimately lead to the end of his life. It is deliberate. Jesus has a plan. Mark 14, John didn't tell us this, but Mark 14 verse 2, it says, the chief priests and the teachers of the law were looking for some sly way to arrest Jesus and kill him. Notice, but not during the feast, they said, or the people may riot. We want to kill Jesus, but we can't do it at Passover. Jesus said, are you sure? He is going to enter a series of events and statements which is going to secure the fact that the leaders will have no option but to take his life during the Passover. Why would he do that? Because his hour has come. So many times in the Gospels, Jesus demonstrates that he really doesn't want to bring much attention to himself. And we'll look at some of those things in a minute. But that is going to radically change. But in Bethany, the 3 siblings, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, decide to hold a wonderful banquet in honor of Jesus. For who he is, for all that he has done, for their affection for him. I mean, he did raise Lazarus from the dead after all. So let's have a banquet in Jesus' honor. And John says, oh, and by the way, of all the people that were gathered around the banquet table, one of them was Lazarus, the one whom Jesus raised, John points out, in case you forgot from the previous chapter. I've done a lot of funerals in my life, and especially in a small town. Usually after the funeral, you have a number of the supporters and especially all of the family that go to the graveside, and you have a few words at the graveside, and then you put your boutonniere on the casket, and then everybody leaves, and they usually go back to the church building for a dinner of some kind, a lunch of some kind. What would you think if you were attending the lunch after a funeral and the guy who you just saw in the casket is sitting around going, hey, how y'all doing? I mean, it's not much removed from that. It hasn't been that long since Lazarus was raised from the dead, and there he is, I almost said sitting, but reclining at the banquet. You all know how they ate back. People tell you this all the time, but you recline. In the first century, you lean on your left elbow and eat with your right hand. You just have to suck it up, Paula. You're left-handed. You can't have someone going the wrong way. You'll have to learn how to eat right-handed, because that's what everybody did. And I hesitantly point out that all of the people around that banquet table were men. The women didn't eat at the banquet. I'm sorry, but hey, it's not my rule. I didn't arrange that. But the men were the ones who were at the banquet table. And John just points out that Martha was serving, because that's what Martha did. She would run in and get the egg salad and bring it to the table and run back out and get something else, run back in. And although in this situation she doesn't complain that Mary is not helping her, but Mary isn't helping her because Mary has something else in mind. I don't know when it occurred to Mary to do what she was about to do, but it was pretty significant. It was pretty radical, because Mary entered the room without potato salad. She was carrying some kind of holder of, it's nard. Do y'all have any nard at your house? We're all out of nard. Paula,
Yeah.
put that on the shopping list. We need some nard.
You have opium.
Opium.
I wouldn't be surprised, Paul. That's her perfume. But anyway, Mary comes in with nard, from what I understand, and I just read, nard was some kind of perfumed ointment that smelled a bit like gladiolas, and I don't even know what a gladiola smells like, but that's what the books say.
We have some in our backyard.
Gladiolas or nard?
Gladiolas.
Polly, you're doing your best to get me off track, but it's not going to work. Nard came from a bush that was a shrub, shall I say, that was grown in northern India. And it was the only place that it was grown. And so the stuff would be harvested off of the bushes, it would be made into this ointment, and then it would be shipped on camelback, a fur piece, as they say in Texas, all the way over to Palestine. And it was extremely expensive. Now, you could get some nard and something else and kind of mix it together and make your nard bigger, but then it wouldn't be pure nard, would it? And how was Mary's nard described?
Pure.
Pure nard. Now, I'm not going to spend any time on this. I'm just going to mention it to you. There are anointing stories in all of the four Gospels. And there are differences in the way they're told. Some of the commentators try to show you how these differences might fit together, and they could I will tell you this. I think John is telling us about the same anointing that Matthew and Mark did, but I think the anointing that Luke tells us about is actually a different anointing completely. But you can read. If you're interested in that, you can look it up. All I want us to focus on is the way John tells the story. Mary comes into a room that's full of men. She doesn't have anything to eat. She has this container of nard. And John simply mentions that she put it all on Jesus. And, it says she put it on his feet. But whether she put it all on his feet or started with his head and then there was left over and so she went to his feet, I don't know. But it was a most extravagant act. I mean, John wants us to see that. And it's pointed out that what this nard is worth is 300 denarii, and that's about a year's wages. That's more than your opium perfume costs, Phil. And it says that the aroma of this ointment, this perfume, filled the house. Everybody was extremely aware of what had happened. Now, one of the disciples, John points out, had a complaint with Mary. Judas Iscariot said, I don't know what this woman's thinking. I mean, this is worth a year's wages, and that money could have been divided up and given to the poor, and wouldn't that have been a better use of the perfume? The other Gospels tell us that it wasn't just Judas who objected. John picks Judas out of the crowd. But many of the men who were in attendance at that banquet, according to Matthew, complained that this was a waste that should never have happened. And Jesus defended that woman. He said, "Leave her alone." I love those words. Leave her alone. What she has done is in preparation for my burial. Now, I'm sure the disciples might say, what? No, they don't get it. They don't get it. And Jesus says something else, which seems strange, but he says, the poor you will always have with you. Did you read that? Mm-hmm. That's actually a quote from Deuteronomy chapter 15. And I think I typed,
Yeah, you did.
I typed that up somewhere.
15,
Okay.
11.
15,
Yeah,
11.
where's it? Anyway, I can't find it, but it doesn't. Paula, these notes are incomplete. We won't stand for
It's
that
right
next
here.
week.
15, 11.
Unfortunately, yeah, I don't. I'm not on that page. So, anyway, when you read in context from that chapter in the Old Testament, the poor you will always have with you. Jesus is taking liberties with the text. I'm just saying. I'm sorry, Lord, if I'm, because what it says is, you will always have poor in the land. Therefore, make sure you reach out and take care of them. You with me? Don't get so used to the poor that you never do anything for them, but because the poor you will always have with you, make sure that you treat them with an open hand. But on this occasion, Jesus says, you will have the poor with you all the time, but not me. I'm not going to be around that much longer, and this is a fitting thing for her to do for my burial. But Mary takes it a step further, doesn't she? She takes off her head covering, takes whatever pins were holding her hair in place, and dropped her hair down and began to wipe Jesus' feet with her hair. I'm not sure your hair would work, Phyllis. I'm not sure anybody's hair in here would work. We don't go in for that very much, that kind of long hair. It's interesting, but Paul says in 1 Corinthians 11 and verse 15 that a woman's long hair is her glory. Her glory is what it says. And if that's the case, and if Mary was raised with that thought, when she unbinds her hair, which by the way, only a husband ever saw. So I'm telling you, this was very unconventional at best for Mary to do this. But it clearly was an act demonstrating how grateful she was to Jesus, and I think in a very real sense an act of worship. She took her glory and wiped the feet of the Master with her. Again, it was a rather strange event that Jesus defended. There is Deuteronomy 15:11. I knew I had it in there. There will always be poor people in the land, Deuteronomy says. Therefore I command you to be open-handed toward your brothers and toward the poor and the needy in your land. Isn't it strange that Mary is remembrance for her fragrance and Judas for his odor?
That's funny.
Anybody got a grandson named Judas? Probably. How about Benedict? No. There are some names that are associated with things that are a little bit on the despicable side, and we tend not to use those names because of what is associated with them. By the way, John doesn't tell us this, but Matthew does. Matthew says that after this happened, Judas walked out the door, went to the chief priests and said, "How much you give me? How much will you give me to betray him?" And they handed him 30 pieces of silver and said, "Let us know." So this event and the scolding that Judas received pushed him over the edge. And now he becomes the guy who is the betrayer. And John mentions in passing, and I don't know that it's important, but it could be. He said that when Judas objected, it wasn't really because he cared for the poor. It was rather because he was the group's treasurer. And he used to steal money out of the treasury. And so he didn't want that money to be wasted when it could have been sold, and he could have been in charge of distributing it to whoever he thought was appropriate. If you ever watch a movie about biblical times, the actor who portrays Judas is usually he's got kind of a pointy chin and a pointy nose and a little David Niven mustache. And always skulks around, looks like he's looking for trouble. I think that is so not what Judas looked like. I think he may have been clean cut. And he was trusted enough by the apostles that they put him in charge of the money purse. Because Judas appeared to be a great guy. And I don't know if he was a great guy when Jesus chose him. All I know is that somehow in the process, and it's over 3 years, somehow during the process, Judas becomes disillusioned. And while the other apostles are learning to accept the values that Jesus teaches, Judas never buys into that. And so he took the opportunity to steal from the money bag, and he took the opportunity to find out how much he could get for Jesus. 30 pieces of silver. So when word gets out that there's a banquet in Bethany and Jesus is there, there are pilgrims who are coming on their way, and Bethany is right on the way to Jerusalem, and they begin to congregate there in that area of Bethany. And now Jesus says, we are going to make this interesting. John doesn't tell us the details of this, but Matthew, Mark, and Luke do. He sends his disciples into town and says, you come to a house, it's the second on the left. I made that up, it's not in the text. You'll find a donkey tied there. Bring him here. And in fact, when they went there and they loosed the donkey, the guy said, hey, what do you think you're doing? And they said what Jesus told them to say. The master says, it'd be okay for us to take him. And he goes, oh, okay, well, if that's what it's for, fine. You know, I don't know if Jesus had made arrangements or the guy, I don't know. But he said, that's fine. And they bring the colt to Jesus, the colt of a donkey. And they spread their garments on the colt, and Jesus gets on the colt. And he begins to ride down toward Jerusalem with the procession that is coming there for the Passover anyway. And according to John, people who were in town also start to come out. And they begin to line the roads and to take off their outer garments and throw them in the road as a sign of their loyalty, as a sign of their adoration. And they cut branches off the trees, the palm trees, and they lay those in the road, you know. The donkey's lucky he didn't trip over all that stuff. Did y'all go to a Palm Sunday service? Mm-hmm. We did. And I'll just show you my old fogey side here. I can't help it. 8-year-olds waving the things like this, you know. Okay. It gets the kids involved, whatever. And maybe it was my granddaughter, I'd feel differently about it. But it is so much unlike what that scene was in the first century. It was a scene of deep devotion and of adoration and of worship. Not of, hey, look, Grandma, I got one. You know, that kind of thing. Sorry, there's my old fogey, and I'll probably have one or two more before him. But anyway. And that ride was so different from what Jesus had been doing all through the Gospels, all through the 3 years that he had spent with his disciples. And I gave you a list of scriptures. I've actually typed them out so that I can read them without looking them up in the Bible. Mark 5:43, after Jesus had brought the little girl back to life. Remember, there's only 3 resurrections in Jesus' ministry. The little girl, the guy in the funeral, the young man in the funeral, and Lazarus. Well, when he raised the little girl in Mark chapter 5, he spoke to her, little girl, Talitha, get up. And she awoke and got up. And Jesus says, Matthew says, Mark, I'll get it right in a minute. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this. The people who had seen the little girl die and then brought back to life, Jesus said, don't even think about sharing this. Is that going to work, by the way? No. Anything happen any interesting thing today? Not really. How do you keep something like that quiet? But the thing I want you to see is that that's what Jesus wanted. And then in Mark chapter 9, the transfiguration. You know about the transfiguration? Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up on the mountain. He gets to visit with Moses and Elijah, and they see the glory and so forth. When they're coming down the mountain, according to Mark chapter 9, verse 9, Jesus gave them orders not to tell anyone what they had seen. Can I mention Elijah? No. Don't tell anyone what you have seen. Why is he doing that? You know the answer, Paul. What's the answer?
'Cause it's not his
hour
time.
has not yet come. Then, in Matthew 8 and verse 4, after he had cleansed the leper and completely changed his life, he told the leper, see to it that you don't tell anyone. And that would be interesting. Abe, didn't you used to be a leper? Oh no, it must be somebody else on my block. Well, of course they know he was a leper. But Jesus says, you don't tell anyone how that leprosy went away. And then in Matthew chapter 16 and verse 20, that's when he starts a discussion with his disciples. And he says, what do people say about me? Who do they say I am? And they go, well, some think that you're John the Baptist come back to life. Some think you're Elijah. Some Jeremiah, one of the other prophets. There's a lot of differences in what people say. Yeah, well, who do you say? You tell me who you think I am. And Peter steps up, as he often did, and says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And they talk about the fact Jesus said, Peter, you got that from God. I mean, that information comes from God. And I'm going to build my church and the key. Anyway, all of that takes place. And then at the end of that story, it says, then he warned his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Christ. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God, Peter says. And all the other disciples were right there. Don't you tell anyone that I'm the Christ. Don't do it. And then the one in John that I'm reminded of. It was after the feeding of the 5,000 back there in chapter 6. In verse 15 it says, Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again into the hills by himself. All through the ministry of Jesus, over 3.5 years, he makes sure that he is not in the limelight at all. He discourages people telling others who he is because he knows what's going to happen. But now it is different. Now he mounts a colt and rides down that hill into Jerusalem. And there are people lying 10 deep along the side of the road, and they're shouting, Hosanna! Which means save us now. And they probably meant from the Romans. But Jesus has bigger plans. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. In doing that, Jesus, first of all, knows that he is fulfilling Scripture. Zechariah chapter 9 and verse 9, I believe. Yes. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. That's the people of Zion. Shout, daughter of Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and having salvation, gentle and riding on a donkey. And for years, that scripture had been the key focus of the messianic hope. Here he would come. Let's get a donkey, just like the scripture says, and I'm going to ride on it, and I'm going to go down to Jerusalem. And when all of these people start shouting praises and so forth, Jesus doesn't say, no, y'all don't talk like that. Why? Because his hour has come. And Jesus now wants to be the focus of the attention of the people because he knows what that will do to the Jewish leaders. It will force their hand. Remember, they said, yeah, we need to get rid of him, but not at the feast. Not at the feast. Because the people might riot. So they have it in their plans to do it after Passover, but God has it in his plans that his son should be the Passover lamb for the world. And it starts with riding down that hill from Bethany to Jerusalem on a donkey and accepting the accolades of all of the people. John is honest enough to admit that even the disciples didn't understand what was going on. John said, we didn't get it. And I don't know that I would have admitted that, but he did. I was going to read something out of Moore's here if I can find it. Have you noticed how the commentaries, the print in the commentaries is a lot smaller than it used to be?
You forgot your glasses.
I don't need no stinking glasses. Later, John tells us that when the Holy Spirit came, he would lead believers into all of the truth. In this verse, he gives us an example of this. At first, the disciples did not understand what these things meant, things which they themselves had done. It was only when Jesus was glorified that they recalled these events and their significance. It was only then that they recalled these prophecies and saw how they had been fulfilled. So I appreciate, remember I told you that the apostles said goofy things? John admits we didn't get it. Later, we got it. Through the help of the Holy Spirit, whom Jesus is going to talk about in chapters for the fall. Okay, so you won't want to miss that. Okay, now, what time is it? Oh, we're rolling. At this point, John introduces the fact that there were certain Greeks that decided they wanted to see Jesus. Verse 20, now there were some Greeks among those who went up to worship at the feast, and they came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, with a request. Sir, they said, we'd like to see Jesus. And then Philip went straight to Jesus. No, he didn't. He went to tell Andrew. And Andrew and Philip, in turn, told Jesus. This allows for speculation. First of all, who are these Greeks? Now, this is not speculation, but there will be some to come. It's possible that they were God-fearers, people who were in a position where they had come to accept that this Jehovah God that the Jews worshipped and talked about was the true God, and they would come to the feast. Now, they would only be allowed in the court of the Gentiles, you understand. They had to stay out there. Or they could be proselytes. You all know what a proselyte is. That's someone who has decided, I'm all in. I'm all in. They offer a sacrifice, they are baptized, and they become part of the Jewish nation. But racially, they're still Greeks. Religiously, they're now Jews. So there apparently is a number of these people, whether they're proselytes or whether they're God-fearers, I don't know. Remember the centurion in Acts 10, he was a God-fearer. He hadn't made the plunge yet, but okay. But they're Greeks. We'd like to see Jesus. And here's the speculation part. Maybe they had heard folks talking. I get the impression they're all out of towners, but when they get there, they hear a lot about, well, I wonder if he's going to come. I wonder if he'll dare be here. I wonder if he'll show his face around here. Who? Oh, it's Jesus. You don't know? No, I've never met him. But apparently, Philip is seen as someone who is a disciple of Jesus and has close contact with Jesus. And so these Greeks go to Philip and say, you know, if it could be arranged, we'd like to visit with him. Some speculate even further. You see, in the other Gospels, there seems to have been a second cleansing of the temple. I don't have time to talk about that. But if there was a second cleansing of the temple, you remember the things that happened in the cleansing of the temple. That's where the tables get overturned and the animals get driven out and the money changers get run out of town. All of that takes place in the court of the Gentiles. And it's possible that these people visiting Jerusalem had seen that because they're in the court of the Gentiles, and they think, who is this that dares to do this? We'd like to chat with him. And so they asked Philip, could you get us 20 minutes? And Philip thinks, I don't know. I don't feel like I'm high enough up on the food chain to make that decision. What do you think, Andrew? See, he goes to his buddy Andrew. What do you think, Andrew? Do we dare do that? And Andrew goes, I think we do. And so Andrew and Philip go to Jesus and tell him that there are some Gentiles who want to see him. And Jesus' response is amazing. It's in verse, my print, 23.
23.
Jesus replied, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. The coming of the Greek people triggers the conversation about what time it is. Jesus already knows that when he rides to Jerusalem on the donkey, but the coming of the Greeks remind Jesus now is the time for the Son of Man to be glorified. And then he says, I tell you the truth, and let's assume that the Greeks are there. I tell you the truth, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. Now, I don't know a lot about agriculture, but I grew a morning glory once when I was in high school. Y'all know what a morning glory is?
What a mistake.
I thought it'd be really cool if I got a seed and put it in the ground and watered it, and it really happened. It grew into a morning glory. I was so proud. But I did find out a lesson that, if you just leave the seed sitting out on the concrete, it doesn't grow. And Jesus says, if you put it in the ground, amazing things happen. And he is clearly talking about what is going to happen to him. If he remains outside of the ground, he won't have the kind of response to his life that God has intended all along. But if it dies, and if you put it in the ground, wow, it produces many seeds. I don't know if it occurs to you, but we're kind of part of the fulfillment of that prophecy. We're the seeds that came out of that seed. Oh, there have been millions of seeds before us, but it's still true for us. We are who we are, and our convictions are what they are because of what Jesus decided on this occasion to do, to give his life, to be the seed that goes to the ground and produces many seeds. And there's something about the coming of the Greeks that triggers that. And I, again, when the disciples heard this, I don't know if they went, boy, that's pretty deep, but I think I get it. I don't know if they did or not. Later, they obviously would. And then he says, the man who loves his life will lose it, while the man who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, my servant also will be, and my Father will honor the one who serves me. Now that's where the text ends that we were going to cover tonight. But I made a few notes. I guess they'd be called applications, Paula. And it's 3 principles we learn from the Greeks who come to meet Jesus. Number 1, Jesus accepts seekers at all times. This was not a convenient time for Jesus. His heart is heavy. His mind is full of all the things that are going to happen to him. I mentioned, if you only had 1 week to live, what would you do? Well, what if you knew that at the end of the week you were going to be nailed to a piece of wood and left to die? That's hard for our minds to get around. And I'm sure that Jesus is wrestling with that. But here come these Greeks and they want to see him. They want to have contact with him. And I just mentioned that Jesus accepts seekers at all times. There is no bad time to come to Jesus. And the Lord is not someone who says, you know what, I'm busy. I've got other things in my mind. I'm preoccupied. No. There's never a bad time to come to Jesus. He accepts seekers at all times. Secondly, Jesus accepts seekers of all types. Maybe Philip is wondering whether Jesus would have time for these guys because they're not just Jews, you know, they're Greeks. Do we bother him with Greeks? And Andrew says, I think we need to. It doesn't depend on your nationality. Thank you, Lord. I'm a Canadian. It doesn't matter your race. It doesn't matter your gender. It doesn't matter your politics. I was going to say something about politics, Paula, and I kind of... Don't do it? I'm going to do it.
Devil made me do it.
Just let me back up a little. Because it's not political in the sense of politics, your side and my side, or whose side. But here's what I want to say about that. Back there, when the Sanhedrin got together and said, we've got to do something because he's doing all of these miracles, and if things don't change, they're going to come here and take our place. Some of you think that Jesus could never be a Democrat, and some of you think he could never be a Republican. And I think he would go, I'm not really interested. It's what I think. But here's what I see in politics today, okay? I'm just going to tell you, and it makes me crazy. Someone comes up with an idea and presents it to someone. And instead of saying, is that good for the country? There are two questions. Number one, whose idea was it? And number two, will supporting it or not supporting it get me reelected?
That's sad.
It is sad. And it's exactly what the Sanhedrin is doing here. They're not making a decision based upon what's good for the people. They're making a decision based on, is it good for us? And that's what's going on in the leadership of our country right now. Notice I didn't say Republicans or Democrats because they both do it. That comes from a Canadian, I understand. But someone who has a vital interest in what goes on. That was a detour, Paula. I apologize. She'll tell me later, I told you shouldn't have said that. But anyway, that's all right. It doesn't matter even on your politics. You know, when you come to Jesus, he accepts all types. But here's the third one, and you won't like this one as much. Jesus accepts seekers on his terms. Sometimes people come to Jesus and say, here's what I can offer you. And if you could hear him, I think you'd hear the Lord saying, that's not how this works. You don't tell me. I tell you. Because if he is the Lord, if he is the Christ, if he is God in the flesh, that John says for all of these chapters that he is, he gets to decide what we're going to be. And then he says, the man who loves his life will lose it, and the man who hates his life in this world will keep it unto eternal life. Now don't get lost in the loves and hates, but here's what obviously Jesus is saying. If you're all about this world, you're toast. If your life is just about what's going on here and what's best for you here, it doesn't work that way. But if you will Abandon your life. Surrender your life. Die to yourself, as Jesus says on another occasion. That's who I'm looking for. And then he emphasizes that whoever wants to be my disciple will follow me, and where I am, my servant will also be. Jesus has just said, I am going to lay down my life. I expect you to do the same. Now, whatever that means to you, and it would mean different things to different people, I'm sure. But I don't think we're very good at doing that. I'm the first one. I'm not saying this is you and not me. But Jesus tells us what discipleship is about. And don't focus on this life. He says, as a matter of fact, in a very dramatic sense, you need to hate your life in the sense of that you're not going to nurture yourself and forget others. If you're going to be my follower, he says, you need to do what I do. You give up your life. You surrender your life. And I think the Greeks heard that. I think the Jews heard that. And I think that's the message that has rung down through the years to every single one of us. There's never a bad time to come to Jesus. You can be anything and come to Jesus. And number three, when you do, you come on his terms. That's hard for me. And I'm going to guess it's probably hard for you too. But it's in the book. So I decided I'd remind us all about it. Okay, it is exactly 8:02, which is pretty close to when I normally get through. So if you're not here next week, then I'll know you didn't want to die to yourself after all. And teasing.